Hello everyone and welcome back to Towergate. It is day 83, May the 25th, 2017, Wednesday. Garbage night. Oh man. Wow. Last night I did a pretty long video. I apologize for that video being so long. But I'm going to try to make this one shorter. But anyway, yesterday I just, what I did is I went through and read a transcript of the hearings, and there was a lot of questions and a lot going on in that hearing, and so I just kind of read through a transcript of it. I didn't watch any video. A lot of times you get a different view of something when you watch it than just reading the transcript. So I have had a chance to watch the video, specifically focusing on all the interview time that Trey Gowdy had with John Brennan. And so I have a few thoughts on that for tonight's Towergate video. Some things I picked up on, you may have picked on, and some things we might watch for down the road. Because really, Trey Gowdy is really the only one on the House side, and Senator Grassley, the only one on the Senate side, who are really broaching the surveillance issue. Pretty much everyone else is talking about the Trump collusion. But Gowdy and Grassley do, and specifically Gowdy, does spend a little bit more effort going after the surveillance issue and some of the leaking as well. So I'm going to drill down on that a little bit tonight, because I've learned a little bit more from watching the video and paying close attention to Trey Gowdy's questions. So there's a couple things I want to point out to you. But before I do, there was one really interesting, strange thing that occurred today, and I don't know when this happened. It just kind of hit the news wires today. You can watch the video for yourself. It's a very short video. I think it's just audio. There might be some video of it, but I just heard the audio. And it has to do with Debbie Wasserman Schultz literally threatening the chief of the U.S. Capitol Police. Now, the U.S. Capitol Police, as well as some other investigative agencies, are in the process of investigating a Pakistani man named Imran Awan. Now, some of you people have heard of him. He is an IT tech who was hired or given his position by Debbie Wasserman Schultz, and he primarily works for Democrats. And I don't believe it's the Democratic National Committee. I believe it's the actual Democrats in Congress. Now, he has been suspected and is suspected of engaging in some criminal activity, but also some activity that's he definitely engaged in activity that's highly questionable, ethically speaking, in the sense that while serving in his position as the IT tech for the Democrats in this House, and I don't know if it's just the committee that Debbie Wasserman Schultz is on or the entire Democratic side of the House, but essentially what this guy did was he billed the committee $4 million. And as part of that $4 million, a good chunk of that $4 million was billing for his services, as well as 3 of his relatives, one being his brother, which he put on the payroll. And they appear to have been very careless with handling classified information. And so they're under investigation for that. But apparently the device, the equipment that he was using working for the Democratic committee or what have you, belongs to essentially Debbie Wasserman Schultz. Now, she sits on the committee that determines and what the budget is going to be for the Capitol Police. So she has a very serious conflict of interest, because she is threatening the man, and she controls, or is head of the committee that controls the funding for his office, the Capitol DC Police, which could be a serious criminal violation, certainly a conflict of interest for Debbie Wasserman Schultz. Now, I don't know if she knew that she was on camera. Excuse me. I don't know if she knew that she was being recorded. I would think that she didn't, because I believe she is an attorney or has a legal background, and certainly if you thought there was a recording happening, you would never have said what she said, because it is definitely threatening. You can listen to it for yourself. Just Google it. But she basically said that there would be consequences. She was badgering him about returning the device that he is holding for this investigation, because apparently when they discovered some of his mishandling of classified information and possibly spreading or disseminating information, they started an investigation and they confiscated various pieces of equipment. And Debbie Wasserman Schultz is making the argument that that equipment belongs to her and that she is not under investigation. But as far as the Capitol Police are concerned, it was within the area or the environment where the violation occurred, and therefore it is subject to being confiscated and looked at. And so she was basically badgering him and saying, look, that's mine and I'm not under investigation, so I want it back. And if I don't get it back, there's going to be serious consequences. So that is that's very interesting. And I'm pretty sure that Debbie Wasserman Schultz did not know that she was being recorded, because it doesn't look good. And really, the idea that this woman is still around after what she was involved in during the campaign, clearly it's extraordinary the way that these people take care of each other. I mean, I think the day after she was fired or forced to step down from as the DNC chair, Hillary Clinton brought her right into her campaign. I mean, the Bernie Sanders supporters had to love that one. Talk about putting the finger in your eye. I mean, it's one thing to have the head of the DNC cheating your opponent and caught doing it. It's something else the very next day to bring her onto your campaign, and then still to go out in the general election and say to those Bernie Sanders supporters, hey, I expect you all to fall in line and vote for me. So apparently a lot of Bernie Sanders supporters did not go out and vote for Hildebeest. Maybe that's why. Maybe that's one of the many, many reasons why. Oh my goodness, the Democrats are such a mess. Okay, so love that stuff. Nectar of the gods. Okay, let's deal a little bit with what I visually noticed from watching John Brennan being interviewed, let's say, or questioned by Trey Gowdy. My initial response when reading it, it didn't jump out at me, but after watching it, it looks to me like Trey Gowdy is playing a bit of cat and mouse. There are certain questions that he asks, and the way he asks those questions, the specifics and the way he drilled on them, leads me to believe that Trey Gowdy has learned something from the documents that he has received that were requested from the NSA or the intelligence community in general. There's something he's learned, because he was really dialing in on a specific thing, and I'll get to that in just a minute. But in general, that's the feeling I got from watching Trey Gowdy. Now, watching Brennan, he's kind of a shifty character anyway, but watching Brennan, there were certain questions that Trey Gowdy asked him, particularly when it got to the leaks or the surveillance, where he definitely appeared to be nervous. His demeanor changed, and as he would answer the question, he would look down. His eyes would look down as opposed to looking up at the committee, which he was normally doing as he was being questioned. But during a couple of questions, a series of questions that Trey Gowdy was asking about the surveillance, the unmasking, and the leaks, I was watching, and he got very fidgety in his chair. He looked down a lot, and he was really fidgety with his hands and fingers. His hands and fingers were really working like very fidgety in his hands and his hand movements and stuff going on while he was looking down, and he seemed to be very uncomfortable during that line of questioning. And so that was the kind of the visual thing that I picked up on, and it just seemed like again, like I said yesterday, it's a very tricky thing for Brennan and Comey and Clapper, and if we ever see Lynch and Rice and people like that, because they're really in a difficult situation. On one hand, they want to really go into detail, and they really want to make this case of Russian hacking the election, Russian meddling, Trump collusion, this type of thing. But at the same time, they want to be very aloof and act as ignorant as possible when it comes to how deeply they were involved in unmasking and surveilling. And you can't have it both ways. I mean, you were either deeply involved or you were not. You can't be deeply involved when you're talking about collusion and an investigation of Russia hacking or meddling or what have you, and at the same time claim complete ignorance or near ignorance when it comes time to discuss the surveillance. When the reason for the surveillance, we're being told, is because of what was discovered in the collusion from the intelligence that they were receiving. And we know that they were receiving it because we talked about that yesterday, that the FBI did in fact brief Barack Obama, and you can assume he had these people in the room with him and others as well, and there's no question that information will be disseminated. And we know that Susan Rice was running her own little investigation. Why she was running her own little investigation is good, something we'll learn more about when she finally is brought in to testify, whether it is in front of a congressional hearing or in front of a grand jury. I can assure you at some point Susan Rice is going to be answering some questions. She is at the very heart and center of the surveillance for sure, and she's already admitted to the unmasking. She's admitted to it. There's no question she was unmasking. And this is why she tried to get immunity. It's why she's trying to cut a deal. It's why she backed out from going and testifying in the hearings. It's the reason she's acting the way she is, and the reason that she's lawyered up, and that she says nothing, and that everything goes through her attorney. So that's another issue that we will be getting to in the future, I am sure. But let's get back to Trey Gowdy. Some questions. He asked the question, yes, he pressed Brennan at one point on giving names and specifics, and you could see that really got Brennan to twist in his seat, because he was essentially making the point that he was saying about the unmasking that how in depth do you go? Do you give names and specifics without evidence or proof or what have you? And it was very hard for Brennan to answer that question. It was very uncomfortable for him, because essentially it's a setup question, which tells me that Trey Gowdy has got a question coming down the road, because the question he was asking was for Brennan to tell him specifically about the type of information or intelligence that you must have, or evidence you must have, before you begin unmasking. What sort of evidence or proof do you need about someone, a private U.S. citizen, before you begin to unmask? So that's a very strange question just to throw out of the blue. It's the type of question that you ask as a setup to another question that's coming down the road. And that question may not be intended for Brennan. The question may not be intended for Brennan. It was to get Brennan to go on record and state what the evidence or what level of proof that he would need to see, or the intelligence community might need to see, before they unmask. So this is a setup question, because it had no real reason or relevance to or nothing, no answer that Brennan would have given would have made much difference to that specific question without there being something else around it. It's just a question you pull out of, the air, and it really has no meaning unless it's attached to something else, which is coming later. And every one of these questions I'm about to tell you about all are exactly like that. They're questions that you only ask that on their own, they have no real relevance or meaning. They only would have relevance or meaning if there is something else that these are questions that are setup questions for something that's coming later to someone else, possibly Susan Rice, possibly Comey, or someone else. Every one of these questions are setup questions. In themselves, they don't really mean anything. They're kind of weird. They only mean something if you know something, if you have some fact that you already have established, either because he's seen something in some documents that he has been able to look at, or maybe something he's learned from the closed or classified sessions he's had with Rogers and Comey and Clapper, and I assume Brennan as well. So these are setup questions for a later witness at a later time. That was the first one. Then, of course, he did ask Brennan directly if he ever requested unmasking. And Brennan said he did. He talked about in the year 2016. Did he request unmasking? He said he did. Then Trey Gowdy asked him another very, very interesting question, which again, on its own, without any context to it, is a strange question. He says, did any U.S. ambassador request names be unmasked? He was asking Brennan if any U.S. ambassador had requested names be unmasked. Now that's a very interesting question. And what this tells me is that Trey Gowdy has seen or learned something from the closed sessions or from some information he's received that some U.S. ambassador, I'm not sure who, but some U.S. ambassador must have requested some names being unmasked. Again, this is a question that is a setup for somewhere, some other witness down the road. He also asked this definitely set up question here. He asked Brennan, Trey Gowdy asked Brennan, did he unmask or were there any unmasking requests, or did he unmask anyone in the last 2 days as his term as CIA director, which would have been the 19th and the 20th of January 2017. And former CIA Director Brennan instead said no. He said no. Now, why would Trey Gowdy ask specifically about unmasking that was done on the day before and the day of the inauguration, Trump's inauguration, January 19th and 20th? Why would he specifically target those 2 days? It could only be because there was some unmasking done, and he's learned that through some classified briefing or from documents he's seen, that there was some sort of unmasking done the day before and the day of the inauguration. And that's why he asked him that question. And Brennan said no, he did not. This is another question that's designed as a setup for someone else later on, possibly James Comey. He also asked John Brennan if he knew who commissioned the dossier. And I think what he was referring to was at the time that the dossier had come into possession of the intelligence community, which we know it came into possession of James Comey just a few days before the election, because John McCain gave it to him. And we know exactly what day John McCain gave it to him. But apparently this dossier may have been around before that. And this is another question that Trey Gowdy was asking, because it's a setup for a future question to another witness somewhere down the road. And the reason, because we already know all about the dossier. We know when it was created. We know who created it. We know all this. So why would he ask Brennan if he knew who commissioned the dossier? And I believe the context was during the election or prior to the inauguration, not post facto. You know, now we all know it's all come out. But I think he meant at the time when the so-called investigations were going on, because this question was in context of the investigation that Brennan was doing with the CIA about people in Trump's campaign possibly having contacts with Russian officials. He wouldn't say if they were government or non-government. He wouldn't disclose that. Not publicly. He also asked John Brennan, if he knew about the efforts that were made to verify the dossier. Very interesting question. Again, we all know this now. So he was talking about, and Trey Gowdy is talking about, at the time when all the investigation was going on, before all this came out. And Brennan basically said yes, that he was aware, had become aware of the dossier, and he was aware that there were some efforts being made to verify it. And that's another question that, again, without being in context of something else, it's almost an irrelevant question. And Trey Gowdy doesn't have enough time in these hearings to be asking questions that really have no meaning or have no, that produce nothing. I mean, these are questions that don't matter unless there's something else you're getting to down the road. These are setup questions. Another question he asked. He asked Brennan if he knew if the dossier had been used for any type of court filings. Now, what he's specifically talking about, he's talking about the fact that the FISA request, which you go to a FISA court to request the surveillance, and he was asking Brennan if he knew if the dossier was the reason that was given to request to the FISA court to request surveillance. This is what he was specifically talking about. And to that question, Brennan said, "I don't know." He didn't know. So, as you can see from the answers, from the questions that Trey Gowdy's asked, and these are all questions that are set-up questions that mean nothing on their own. They actually need to be attached to something else down the road for another witness or something else that he clearly Trey Gowdy knows something. He knows something, and he's asking questions to lead people down the path somewhere to where a gotcha question is coming to somebody. And that's what these questions are set up to do. And again, the types of answers that Brennan were given were answers that you give when you realize, Brennan's not stupid. He realizes exactly the cat and mouse game that is going on with this line of questions. And he's very, very careful. Again, like I said yesterday, it's a minefield. Brennan is being very, very careful because he doesn't know probably what Trey Gowdy has seen in terms of documents or evidence that he has received. He doesn't know, and he doesn't know what may be coming down the road with more investigations going on, the special prosecutor, possible whistleblowers. This thing could go on for a year or two. There's much more that could be learned. So the way that Brennan was answering all these questions were the way that you would answer if you knew that you may be culpable in something, and that there could be, and that there probably exists some evidence, but that evidence hasn't yet come forward. You're playing defense for yourself so that you don't incriminate yourself say something now that wouldn't incriminate you now because of what we know, but later down the road, when we learn even more, you could find yourself stepping in it. So John Brennan was making sure that he didn't say anything that would lead to him falling into a perjury trap down the road, or saying anything that would have him coming back again, because I'm pretty sure he doesn't want to come back and talk to Congress. He knows he'll probably be interviewed, certainly by Mueller. But he's being very, very careful about what he says and what he admits to. Again, it's what I noticed from reading the transcripts, is that when they talk about the Russia collusion, oh, he's really on that. But when it comes to surveillance or leaking, he's kind of like, I don't know. So it's a very, very tricky dance through the minefield. He said also, when he was asked by Trey Gowdy, when he requested the unmasking, John Brennan, Trey Gowdy asked him if he used the dossier as part of his assessment to decide, make the decision to do unmasking. And Brennan said no, that the CIA, he as CIA director, and they, the CIA, did not consider the dossier when they made their assessment on whether or not to unmask persons. So here you see John Brennan clearly distancing himself from that, whereas James Comey is not able to. James Comey's already locked in. He's already made that known, that in fact that the dossier, he hasn't come out and said it in so many words, but essentially it's pretty obvious from the line of questions and the answers Comey gave that the assessment, the dossier was certainly a major, if not the major, reason that they used for getting the FISA court to seek a FISA warrant from the FISA court. So Brennan definitely understands that that's a bad deal, and he certainly wasn't going to put himself in the same position that Comey has put himself in. On the issue of leaks, another question, it's a dead setup question for someone else coming down the road. Means nothing to Brennan, and Brennan's answer, because he had already basically answered the question previously a few minutes earlier, but Trey Gowdy comes back and asks the question, another question, very similar question, but he words it this way. He says, what would you say about names being unmasked on the last 2 days of the Obama administration? Excuse me. So, he asked the question earlier, Trey Gowdy asked the question earlier about his last 2 days in office, if he unmasked anybody. He asked if an ambassador ever requested unmasking. And now he asks, again, about, he says, a hypothetical. What would you say about names being unmasked on the last 2 days of the Obama administration? And these names were leaked to the media. So this tells you, and this was the last question in his line of questions, so this tells you that Trey Gowdy knows that some ambassador, excuse me, some ambassador requested unmasking. Some ambassador requested unmasking on the last 2 days of the Obama administration. And Trey Gowdy wants to know where that came from, because there's not many people that can do that. Did it come from the CIA? Did it come from the FBI? Did it come from the NSA? Did it come from the Obama administration themselves, the Attorney General? Who did it come from? Well, he just got John Brennan to say that he didn't do it. And on this last question, Brennan just kind of kicked it around. He didn't, it was a hypothetical question anyway. But the reason these questions are important is because these are all set up questions. You don't ask these types of questions unless you specifically know something, and you're not asking these questions because you want to know the answer. Trey Gowdy already knows the answer to every question he asks. Every one of these questions I just asked you, Trey Gowdy already knows the answer. He's trying to trip someone up, and he's going to ask these similar questions to Comey, if he hasn't already, to Rogers, and he's going to clear them, because I think he knows that probably these guys are going to protect themselves. They're not stupid enough to put themselves out there that far. What this is doing is this is eliminating these guys, so that when they get Susan Rice or Valerie Jarrett or Ben Rhodes or one of these creeps, one of them people are going to have to admit to it. There's just not that many more people, and that's what Trey Gowdy is doing. He knows that there's not that many people who could have requested this unmasking or had this kind of specific knowledge. There's only a limited number of people, and he's eliminating them one by one. So these are questions that that just for yesterday's hearings don't have a lot of meaning. But I can assure you that Trey Gowdy is playing cat and mouse. He already knows the answers to these questions. He probably even already knows who actually did it, or he's narrowed it down. And all he's doing is really clearing the debris field. He's clearing the smoke out of the way, so that when it does come down to that person and they sit there and they try to spin it like Susan Rice or someone else and make it look like, well, it could have been, could have been anybody, could have been this guy, this guy, this guy. He can say, no, 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 no. Couldn't have been, because they were here testifying. I asked the CIA director. I asked the FBI director. I asked the head of the NSA. I asked the head of the DIA. I asked them. They all denied it. So, this is a very interesting line of questions for Trey Gowdy. And one other more interesting note before I go. We have learned the name of the person, and I think most of you guys probably have already heard this by now. We have learned the name of the person who contacted the police and the Washington, D.C. Metro Police, as well as the Seth Rich family, and asked them about why the heck they have a private investigator snooping around the Seth Rich investigation again. Donna Brazile. Again, Donna Brazile is an agent of the Clintons. She works directly for the Clintons. She is a Clinton confidant, a Clinton worker bee. She does dirty work for the Clintons. We now know that after this, after the parents of Seth Rich hired this detective, this Rob Wheeler, to do his own private investigation of Seth Rich's murder, that when Donna Brazile heard about it, she called Seth Rich's parents personally and asked him, hey, what the heck, what are you doing hiring a private investigator? And why is he snooping around and this and that? Then she calls the Washington, D.C. Metro Police and asks them what's going on, probably to let them know not to be giving any information to them, probably wanting to know what questions he's asking and what kind of snooping around he was doing. So obviously Donna Brazile, who is a tool of the Clintons, who does their dirty work for them, is obviously doing some work for the Clintons to sniff around and try to find out why this private investigator is sniffing around again the Seth Rich case, which the Clintons and Debbie Wasserman Schultz and Donna Brazile and people like that, people at the high ups at the DNC, they really want this to go away. But as you know from being on the internet in the last 48 hours, the Seth Rich question continues to grow and grow and grow. It's not going away. They cannot make it go away. You can keep it off CNN and MSNBC. You can even force Sean Hannity to stop talking about it. You can do a lot of those sorts of things, but you can't shut it down. The alternative media is too big. And nobody is doing better on this story than H.A. Goodman. If you're not familiar with H.A. Goodman and you're very interested in the Seth Rich investigation, I highly recommend that you Google Google H.A. Goodman. He does very, very well on this particular topic. Although I wish you would watch my video, Seth Rich Murder Part 2, because there are some facts and details that he acts as if he's not sure of, which I have confirmed because I have in fact read the police report. I've read the police report, and you can too. Just type in Seth Rich Murder Police Report, and you can read it for yourself. When you read that police report, you'll learn some things. One of the things that you'll learn from that police report, HA, if you're watching this video, is that it says right there on the police report the names of the officers who responded. It also states that 3 of the officers who responded were wearing body cams. They also state in the police report that when they arrived, Seth Rich was conscious and he was talking. He was conscious and he was talking with 2 police officers who had body cams, which means they've got video and audio of a conversation they had with Seth Rich as he's laying there, having just been shot. I haven't heard anything about what we learned from those body cams. We should have learned a lot. What do you think that you would be talking about if the police show up and you've just been shot and you're able to communicate with them for about 9 minutes before the ambulance arrives? Sure love to see what was on those body cams. Would love to hear what Seth had to say. Wouldn't you? Maybe that's what Rob Wheeler is trying to learn. Maybe that's what Seth's parents are trying to learn. That's what a lot of us are trying to learn. Why is Donna Brazile, who works directly for the Clintons, why is she so interested? Why aren't they fully supportive of anyone who would be trying to find out what happened to Seth Rich? Well, the answer is because the Democrats, the Clintons, Donna Brazile, Debbie Wasserman Schultz, higher-ups at the DNC and the general Democratic Party and the liberal media do not want to know the truth about what happened to Seth Rich. They do not want to know the truth. They probably, some of these people already know the truth, but they certainly don't want the public to learn the truth. That's the problem, and they certainly do not care a lick about Seth Rich or his parents or how much they are grieving. And these people are hurting. I've watched recent videos, and I can tell you that with personal experience in my own life, having lost my stepfather in a sudden gun-related accident, wasn't an accident actually, but in a gun-related event, that sudden sort of violent deaths like that, this has been, in my case, almost 3 years, and my mother and my sisters have still not recovered from it. Let's put it that way. Seth Rich's parents are certainly hurting, and they want to know the truth. A lot of people want to know the truth. I want to mention one other thing about Seth Rich, and then I promise I'll go. This man who comes out as the PR representative for the Riches, Brad Bauman. Brad Bauman, in case you don't know who he is, he works for a high-powered PR firm in Washington, D.C. They represent Democratic politicians and union labor leaders. These type of people, their job, they are spin meisters, spin doctors. It is, you pay them whenever you get your tit in a ringer, you pay these types of people to go out and do spin for you in the media. These types of people do not work cheap. One of Mr. Bauman's former clients is Hillary Clinton. My question, because Mr. Bauman began representing the Riches within 2 to 3 weeks after Seth Rich's murder. Remember, they live in Omaha, Nebraska. They are not rich people. Their name is Rich, but they are not wealthy people. They're very modest people. They don't have a lot of money. In fact, the investigator, the private investigator, Rob Wheeler, he's being paid by money that was raised on GoFundMe. These people don't have a lot of money. It's other people that are footing the bill for paying for all this. But 2 questions I have. First of all, why would the parents of someone who's been murdered, Why would they need a spin doctor? Why would they need a spin doctor in Washington, D.C. when they live in Omaha? Why would they need a spin doctor who specializes in defending Democratic politicians and union labor leaders? And the most important question of all, who is paying Mr. Bauman? Because he's been on the payroll for 8 months now. These guys don't work cheap. I promise you, we're talking in the upwards of $3,000 to $4,000 a month, probably, to retain his services. The riches don't have $3,000 to $4,000 a month to pay for a spin doctor. Not even sure why you need a spin doctor. Again, as I said, we had a situation in my family 3 years ago, and none of us ever in the family, not my mother, not my sisters or I, never crossed our mind that we needed a spin doctor to explain what happened. Never crossed our minds. If you know anybody who's lost a family member suddenly in a, let's say, violent way, it's very difficult to deal with, and you have a lot of things that go through your mind. But the last thing that goes through the average person's mind is that they need a spin doctor. Why do the riches need a spin doctor? If anybody can answer that question for me, leave it in the comments section. Why do the riches need a political spin doctor? Alrighty, well, thank you for tuning in. That is Towergate. And by the way, one last thing, if you're wondering why I've always got to clear my throat all the time, is because I work in one of the largest, if not the largest, GM parts warehouses on the planet. Our warehouse is so big, it's bigger than some small cities. And we have a lot of traffic, a lot of forklifts, a lot of machinery, a lot of stuff going, and there's a lot of dust in the air. And so all day long, I am breathing this stuff in. And so, it gets in my throat. So that's why I'm always hacking and stuff like that, because I got tons of dust that I breathe in and inhale in my lungs all day long. So when I come home and I do these videos, my lungs are full of this dust. And until I hack it all out, which I won't do for you now, or anything like that, until I hack it all up, it interferes with me trying to talk. But I'll try to do better on that. Maybe I'll try to hack it up before I do my videos. But anyway, those are the questions of the day for Towergate. I appreciate y'all for tuning in. I love your comments. So many great comments, and so many of you are so tuned in. It's fantastic to be able to read your comments. So I appreciate it. Thank you for tuning in, subscribing. You guys have a good night, and hopefully you guys got some good plans for the Memorial Day weekend. I plan on doing yard work. Okay? So you guys have a good night. Take care. Bye.